But Kim, we're doing this because we were asked by some amazing people to do that.
Special request. We have some dear friends, of course, all over the world, and some of them reached out from British Columbia to ask us to have a little chat to you all and remind you of a few things and share some.
Hold on a second.
Share some things.
Did you say British Columbia?
I did. Why, Dave? What do you got on that? What's the lowdown on British Columbia?
Am I to understand that there's something about going on in British Columbia where maybe there's some decisions that are being made that don't really make sense?
There's some previously unaware unsavories when you find out what's going on.
But there may have been
trickery afoot.
Trickery afoot. I love how you did the politically correct and
version of what I usually
the PG-13 version of that.
Yes.
Hey, so British Columbia, man, that tickles a little part of my brain. I wonder if out of the blue I could just
pull out some
just pull out some information
exposure.
So why is it that British Columbia would still be so vitally interested? And here's the wonderful twist. At the end of this story, you know what we're going to find out?
What?
A Republican presidential nominee or candidate, not nominee, a current United States Republican presidential candidate may have been enriched by this story, Kim.
No.
Oh, no. You mean there might be a link between British Columbia's corruption and a current
unsavories are everywhere.
Unsavory? So, Kim, what if you actually just said, hey, Dave, do you have a slide
some information for us, Dave,
that could make life interesting?
There's one.
And by the way, before we get into it, I think it'd be really fun if you all shared this link, because what's about to happen is going to be the unveiling of a story that starts with intrigue and it includes the untimely demise in a plane crash of a former premier of British Columbia. Who happened to die on the same plane as the guy who funded the drug that's going into the injection.
Tell us more, Davo.
Let's start where the story starts, shall we?
Yeah, go.
So once upon a time,
there was
in a forest far, far away, there were a couple scientists, Peter Cullis, Ian McLaughlin, and a few others who actually were working at the University of British Columbia on this thing called a lipid nanoparticle, and specifically a lipid nanoparticle that was supposed to be the carrier agent for mRNA. Now, if you go to the Forbes article about Ian McLaughlin, for those of you paying attention who want to do any research, and if you go to that article, what you'll find is that Ian McLaughlin is the unsung hero of the shot, Kim. Oh. The poor guy. Oh. So these guys got together and they came up with some interesting technology that allowed lipid nanoparticles to carry mRNA. And that's a very important part of our story because they, together with a few others, decided to build that into a technology company, which when it was formed was called Inex Pharmaceuticals. Now, Inex Pharmaceuticals is actually a company. And by the way, Canadians, take notes on these names because I'm giving you all the names that you need to actually research to find out why it is that Canadians are still being subject to draconian measures because, are you ready for this? Canada is profiting from the promulgation of the shot. So the reason why they keep promoting it is they're lining their pocket with the proceeds.
And they don't care.
That's the reason why they are. But Inex Pharmaceuticals was set up to allegedly start commercializing this technology. And they, for a series of very mysterious reasons, got into a rebranding campaign, and they rebranded themselves Tekmira, Tekmira, for those of you paying attention. Now, interestingly enough, Tekmira was awarded a $140 million contract from the Department of Defense of, are you ready for this? The United States.
Wow.
Does that sound like a Canadian venture to you, Kim? Now, for those of you who are not familiar with where money flows and how money flows, it's particularly interesting to me that the biodefense program of DARPA and the Department of Defense and Anthony Fauci's own NIAID decided to award a $140 million contract to a company who at the time had $6.3 million in its pocket. Now, would you say that that probably sounds like an inside deal that probably has another story going
I
on?
think so.
Well, it does, because
Let's
it turns
reveal it.
out that the $140 million contract from the Department of Defense was the Biodefense Readiness Program for, are you ready for this? Ebola. Because the idea was that somehow or another, the amazing research by Ian and Peter and others was going to give us a way to do Ebola injections back in the Ebola scandal. But then along comes 2016, where a very interesting thing happens. And this is where I want people to pay very close attention. There's a mysterious plane crash, Kim.
As there are
Mysterious plane
deaths
crash.
and things at the moment.
Funerals for 3 men killed in BC plane crash will be held this week in Calgary. You know who was on that plane, Kim?
Who?
Well, let's actually go with the following. Killed in the plane
Kennedy?
crash. Yeah. Jim Prentice, who was the premier of British Columbia, killed in the plane crash. But sitting very next to him somewhere in that small plane was Sheldon Reed.
Oh, Sheldon.
Now, Sheldon Reed, for the Canadians who are paying attention, would be a very interesting name to track. Because it turns out that Sheldon Reed, somehow or another, was the funding source with a convertible debit note that actually allowed the following to unfold. Tecmira, Aniline Pharmaceuticals, Inex Pharmaceuticals, and Acuitas and Arbutus Pharmaceuticals. And by the way, you got all the names. All of these names kept working together in, lo and behold, in 2014. They somehow became a partner of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
Here we go. The full circle.
And the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, along with a very interesting partnership with a little pharmaceutical company most of us haven't heard about.
Which one's that?
Well, it starts with P,
Oh, that one.
and it's followed by another consonant. And the consonant is F. Turns out that the Pfizer partnership started somewhere between 2014 and 2016, and they started working together on how they could develop a series of platform technologies funded by the Department of Defense, and the Canadian government mysteriously was funding this alongside of what was going on so that we could have a very robust defense and biodefense readiness program for the Department of Defense in the United States, courtesy of the government of British Columbia, reliant entirely on the government of British Columbia, so that we could be ready for medical countermeasures if and when there was
Something
an
may happen.
outbreak of something that would require a bioremediation program that would involve a medical countermeasure, which would involve injecting mRNA into a person. Now, the fascinating piece of this story, beyond the intrigue of plane crashes and beyond the intrigue of why it was that Sheldon Reed had a convertible debit, which was precisely at the time when this whole technology was about to go under, and why it was that he had a convertible note, and why it was that he was on the plane with the premier of British Columbia when the British Columbia plane went down, because all of those things sound perfectly logical.
normal.
Those things
That happens.
are what we expect to
in a
see
movie.
routinely. We couldn't make a film out of this, could we? We
No,
couldn't
not
make
spy
a
novel.
spy. There you go. You were already on it, a spy novel. But then we have the curveball. And I told you we'd get to the gritty nuts and bolts of this.
Yes.
Kim, there's a guy running for the Republican nomination
here
here
we
in the
go.
United States, Vivek Ramaswamy. I
Ooh.
like that name.
Vivek.
But what I don't like is how he got his money. Because it turns out that
How do
you
get
all
money?
don't know
Do
that the
soon.
individual who is running for the Republican nomination of the United States for president happens to be the owner of the now Arbutus Pharmaceutical Acuitas technology disputed properties and patents around the entire lipid nanoparticle platform. It turns out that the guy running for president has actually not only been enriched by the technology that we've just been talking about, but he is applying that technology, thankfully, to help fund a presidential campaign here in the United States.
Wow.
Isn't that fabulous?
He's dipping his toe in Satan's pie.
There you go. You have a Harvard University educated, Yale University educated individual who has conveniently, among all of the other things he's done, been a biotechnology expert and has been the lead funding source for the Roivant, Immunovant, all kinds of other Vant technologies, which happens to be the resources that are the resources currently being used to profit on the back of mRNA injections.
There you go.
Now, given the financial interest in the fact that we have researchers at the University of British Columbia, given the fact that we have a Republican presidential campaign,
better say his name again.
Vivek Ramaswamy. Given the fact that we have a presidential candidate who is actually running on the ill-gotten gains of pandemic preparedness and readiness, one has to ask the question, why would it be that British Columbia's current government would be so motivated to keep pushing a medical countermeasure that doesn't work? And it is on the back of that which I will then shut up and go back to you, Kim, because what do our friends in British Columbia want the world to know?
Okay, our friends, and I've written a few little notes
here.
Notes,
so here we go.
Lovely friends, and they are doing a lot of great deeds in British Columbia, and they are struggling, and they need everybody's help, and especially those living in British Columbia. And their message for all of you, especially those in Canada, is to not get complacent now. The fight's still very much going, and they are struggling big time. They have hardly any healthcare workers. People are dying in the in accident and emergency rooms. There's a whole lot of chaos still going on, a whole lot of censorship, a whole lot of crazy.
And it's because so far, if you aren't injected, you're not allowed to get your job back.
You're still not allowed to get your job back. So there's a whole lot going on there, and they're fighting a big fight, and there's not many of them. So they have a documentary which Frank is going to put up the link to, and it's called The Hidden Healthcare Crisis, and it's really, really worth watching. And they're also doing some rallies and things like that. And their main website is, well, Frank will put it up, is frw.world/events. And basically want people to just keep up the diligence of what they've been doing. Don't sit around and think, it's back to normal. There is no normal. We're moving forward, and we're still very, very much in the middle of this. And, keep supporting each other, keep doing all you can, watch this butterfly a few times, and, really get behind this group. And, it's not a time to be complacent and just think other people are going to do this for you, especially now, because they are really doing it tough, and it's all hidden, and they're trying to get, more media exposure, and we know how hard that can be. So, yes. So have a look at those links and see how you can, reach out to these people and see how you can help them.
If British Columbia didn't have its fingerprints on the medical countermeasure, they would have followed the rest of the civilized world in realizing that the provision of healthcare is more important than the dogma of the medical countermeasure. But they are now allowing real human beings to suffer and die so that they can prove a point.
Yep.
And it's time that we end that. The Canadian government needs to be put on notice that the Canadian people, who are wonderful, phenomenal, great individuals, the Canadian people deserve better. And if our voice can do anything to help advance that, we're honored to do so. So thank you all for listening. Thank you all for sharing. Yeah. And please make sure, if you're in Canada, you take down the names that I've talked about here. And rather than having me try to solve the problem, ask your government to actually have a release of information. You can use your own requests to get your own information about why it was that we had mysterious funding that just showed up in the nick of time before any business was justifying investment. Why was it that certain investors were able to buy Arbutus when it was a discount and suddenly became a giant economic boon?
Yeah.
Why were these things all done? And why was it that Moderna and Pfizer were already in contracts with these guys in advance of the pandemic we were told was actually in 2019?
Novel.
Why was that? And ask the questions, get the answers, watch the politicians squirm, and keep pushing, because we all need you to stand with us to make sure we do not let this system ever relax until we see justice served.
Absolutely.
Thanks, everybody, and have a great
everyone.
weekend,
Lots
and
of
we'll
love.
see you again very soon. Take care. Bye-bye.